Well, our last but definitely not least speaker of this conference will be Gina Sebok. Gina is of Hungarian-Israeli background, and she's already earned an MA degree in international law and is now doing her PhD in the same field, which will be ready next year, maybe the year after. I think her personal objective, her personal target is very, very interesting. She wants to become a full-time professor, which is a good choice, and want to work for the Academy of Science to find solutions to make Europe a safer place. That's not bad, isn't it? Gina, you've got the floor.
Distinguished guests, colleagues, and professors, good morning. I'm Gina Sebok, a PhD student from the University of Szeged, and it's an honor to be here. So I would like to thank the Academy of Yuste for giving me the privilege of receiving this grant and providing me the opportunity to present my work here. So thank you. The direction I chose for my research applicable to the European mobility grant and doctoral seminar considers the future of religious women in the European Union. I'm currently writing my PhD thesis on the relationship of international law and religious law, which is a hot topic today, considering the influx of Muslim immigrants arriving to the European Union, which is known for its European Union Charter on Fundamental Rights, Article 10, stating that everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. My PhD thesis is studying the relationship of the international law and religious law and how national legislation applies the public law on religious freedom. I was inspired to research about the status of observant women by being one myself, and I recently chaired the UN Women's Committee at my university, at the University of Szeged, where I was honored to host a Hungarian member of the European Parliament who was actively involved in the UN Women in the United Nations. And they debated resolutions about quotas, prostitution, and abortion, and all these topics, but the topic of religious women was not raised in this debate, which I would like to research now. It is especially interesting with the recent Women's March that took place in Washington, D.C. That's where I earned my degree from, and I wish I could have been there, but I was in Europe at the time. So I'm not a female activist personally, but I am the president of the Jewish Women's Organization of my community, and a student of international law, a citizen of the EU, and it is my mission to find out if there are women suffering in the European Union hiding behind the word religious freedom. If we have a clash between gender equality, which is a human right, and the right to religious freedom. And if we have two human rights clashing, then we have a problem. And this is what I'm trying to explore in my research. Okay, so about human rights and religious freedom. Human rights, to quote scientist Donnelly, are droits de l'homme or derechos humanos, the rights that one has because one is a human being. So if we talk about women, women clearly have human rights since they're human beings, so there should be no need for a separate set of rights for women. But this is not so obvious to some of the cultures and religions today. So the free exercise of religion as well is a pretty basic idea today. All human rights, international human rights regimes call for the freedom of religion, the freedom of thought and conscience. And in addition, what do we talk about when we refer to religious freedom? So religious laws in the Judeo-Christian and Muslim tradition were given at the time when the Bible was given. Religious freedom basically means the states respect these commandments or these laws and then their observances by their citizens freely. So the European Union is a model of for integration, Western values, and peace. It is our job to combat issues when we have clashes between, as I said, when we're talking about gender inequality and religious freedom. It's particularly interesting today with the issues of no-go zones in France and refugee women arriving to Europe. It is our job to combat these issues. We cannot have legislation where the respect to the religion clause overlaps the gender equality clause. I'm going to try to find a solution to this issue by finding out which state model fits European Union law, women's rights, and religious observance best. Everyone has equal rights in the EU. We must educate this to our children. No young woman should feel that joining a terrorist group is her only choice or only right. Refugee women during their journeys to Europe are especially vulnerable to gender-based violations while fleeing their dangerous homelands, searching for a safer life in Europe. They're often facing the same levels of oppression on their way from their families, religious communities, and even smugglers who are carrying them through the border in the Western world. So is it really worth the trip for them? I would like to make it worth the trip for them. If I want them to join programs like the Dream of Sofia Corradi, so they can join programs like the Erasmus and reach great lengths, have access to education, have access to the world, pretty much. As I said, the subject of woman is only a part of my thesis. I'm actually studying religious freedom as a whole. So in order for me to get to the part where we're going to continue talking about women, I would like to talk a little bit about the relationship of church and state. So the relationship of state and religion is very different in different states. Although we have universal standards such as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the European Union Charter on Fundamental Rights, all equally calling upon citizens to provide the free exercise of religion to their citizens. The challenge is the way to understand the way states interpret the public law into their national legislation. This is where we have the differences. The degree of freedom to interpret the international law gives states room to apply them in the ways best fit for their own ideologies. My research is studying 5 state models that I'm going to present in a matrix in the following slide, which to show the factors I'm studying in each state to answer the main question. In which state does the religious individual have the most autonomy? Or in other words, the most access to human rights as a religious, an observer of religion, a religiously observant individual. Here I just outlined some of the main treaties on the international regimes, international law on human rights. Basically, the first, I'm just going to read out the quote, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 18, the clause on freedom of thought and religion. Everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This right includes freedom to change his religion or belief, and freedom either alone or in community with others, and in public or private to manifest his religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship, and observance. And then I included, since our focus is the European Union at this doctoral seminar, and I'm looking at the European Union, in particular in the case of migrant women, I include Article 10 of the Charter of the European Union's Charter on Fundamental Rights, which has the clause of freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, where it's adapted from. Where everyone has the right to the freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This right includes freedom to change religion or belief, either alone or in community with others, and in public or in private, to manifest religion or belief in worship, teaching, practice, and observance. And the second part of the clause says that the right to conscience and objection is recognized in accordance with the national laws governing the exercise of this right, which we will see in the matrix that I presented of how different states interpret the law of religious freedom differently, even within the European Union. And I included, I know we're talking about the European Union here, I just included the US Constitution's First Amendment because I'm going to use the United States as a comparison to the laws of the European Union, since they have what's called a separation of church and state, which is a different idea than what we have here. And the First Amendment states, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or forbidding the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So each state, as I said, has the authority and responsibility to implement international human rights, such as the freedom of religion in their own territory, but they do it in their own way, which gives room to human rights violations. Although human rights are universal and binding, states have the liberty to implement them on their own. And I just wanted to bring in Kaduri's chapter on Asian values, our work on Asian values, when we talk about Sharia law, according to Islam, human rights have a different concept, an entire different concept. So only adult Muslim males above the age of 13 are entitled to what they call human rights. So this is a totally different concept of what we have. So when we're talking about respecting or grant religious freedom, from the European perspective, we have a clash here. Just an image of women of different religions, of different religious attire. I'm going to talk about cases that affected religious attire recently in the European Union and their rulings. But first, I just want to mention the 5 state models that I'm studying. You can just go to these are the 5 state models. I labeled them coordinated, pure, cold, enemy, and unity. And these are the life dynamics that I'm studying in these states in order to get a better understanding of particular areas of religious freedom. I chose to study life dynamics such as birth, death, marriage, divorce, religious holidays, red days, religious attire, religious diet, religious courts, conversions, financial support of churches, religion in public institutions such as prisons, hospitals, schools. And this is the matrix I was talking about that I created from my research. And just a little on the models that I'm studying. The pure model, I'm using the United States as an example. In the pure model, there's a complete separation of church and state. There is no state funding available for religious institutions, but the individual has more room. There's more space between the individual and the state. No preferred churches, which is very interesting. Coordinated states like Hungary, Germany are considered, Poland, coordinated states, where they do have a separation of state, but the state works in coordination with the church. For example, there is state funding available for churches in Hungary. There's European Union funding available in these states to turn onto religious activities in these states. And then we have the cold states that I'm studying, which are states like Belgium, France, that actually prefer, that the latest rulings show that it's not so good to be religious in these states at the time because of the court rulings regarding just basic things as access to a kosher diet. I'll bring up a ruling about that, or wearing the veil to public institutions for Muslims. And the other state model that I'm using here is the enemy state, which is like the USSR was, for example, where religion is viewed as evil, as something that needs to be punished. This said it's a spiritual oppression. So that state where we have the most minuses in the matrix in every category, pretty much. And then we have the state of unity, which you can call a theocracy as well, or I put Saudi Arabia there, or I could put Israel there in my research, which is a semi-unity because it's a secular state, but on certain matters such as marriage, divorce, and religious courts, there are no civil courts for these associations, just religious law, Jewish law, as well as in Saudi Arabia, there is Sharia law. This is the model that I'm studying, that I'm using for my research. Just to point out a few things from the model, like, for example, when we talk about religious attire, it's something in a pure state, it's acceptable, because there's no say of the states in the doings of the religiously observant. In a coordinated state as well, it's acceptable. In cold states, we see laws are being passed against religious attire. The same goes with, if we pick another topic from it, as religious diet. In a pure state, it's very easily accessible. In a coordinated, it's accessible, but it's a bit harder to access due to different health regulations, and special permissions are needed in these states, as my research showed. In cold states, it's harder. In the enemy state, it's not, and in the unity state, that's the only thing that's accessible. So this is, and then I just want to go through some cases that back up this matrix. The first case is it's just with Belgian law, the case that took place in Wallonia recently, versus religious law. I titled it this way. So in Belgium, for example, for a long time, the kosher animal slaughter was forbidden due to animal rights reasons. And the court actually passed a recent ruling due to there was a conference of European rabbis that pushed a lobby against this ruling, saying that Belgium is violating religious freedom by not allowing kosher slaughter and not making a kosher diet available for its citizens. So the court ruled in favor of the Conference of European Rabbis, but unfortunately this ruling was overturned just 2 weeks ago. So we see the dynamics of Belgium continue to show that being religious, it's more difficult in these states. So there is a reason why they're called the cold states towards religion. And this affects kosher and halal slaughter, and there is a tendency to do this. Switzerland, Germany, and other countries would like to join this based on animal rights. It's an example, just like the gender equality example that I'm using, where it's women's rights clashing with religious freedom, and here animal rights are clashing with religious freedom of religion. So this is all the cases meant to prove. And there was another case at the Court of Luxembourg, which deals with religious attire. So states like France for a long time held a cold approach towards the religious by forbidding the wear of religious attire for Muslims in public institutions, like the 2004 ruling. The recent ruling of the European Union Court of Justice of Luxembourg actually ruled that an employer has the right to let its employee refrain from wearing religious attire to work, based on the company's image. Because if a worker is dressed wearing religious dress or head covering, everything, it could distort the image of the company. An employer has the right to tell its worker to be dressed in a uniform. So this case ended up this way. So it's another example of the cold approach. But this is an enormous concern to our topic today of religious freedom in Europe, especially in the case of religiously observant women, and Muslim women in particular, who wear the noticeable head covering, and even it goes beyond women, just Jewish males who wear this four-cornered garment hanging out of their clothes called tzitzit, and are they supposed to work without these important religious symbols in Europe now, which is known for being the beacon of human rights? Is this the direction the European Union is taking at the moment when we're supposed to have the freedom of religion available to all? So these are all questions that I'm eagerly looking to explore in my research. And in addition, I plan to conduct a case study interviewing major corporations in Europe if they would be willing to hire religiously observant workers with respecting their holidays, diet, and religious attire to get a better picture of what is the practice behind the theory. Do we really have religious freedom in the European Union? I'll skip this. I'll continue from here. That's fine. And another case that's very current with the issue of religious freedom in Europe today is a case that took place in Hungary, actually. And it's an example of the coordinated model, how my argument, my hypothesis is saying that the pure model is actually the best when there's a complete separation of church and state, although churches lose the benefit of having state funding, because under a pure state, churches are not entitled to state funding. Under a coordinated model, they are entitled to state funding, but then we have an issue of only certain religions, certain churches being recognized as official, given official church status. And this is the case that took place in Hungary. Recently, they're trying to restore at the moment. The Methodists and the Reform Jews were actually rejected for church status. The Reform community was never recognized, but a controversial law of 2011, a law on religion, stripped the evangelical fellowship of the Methodist Church of being a state-recognized church, while they operate several schools, institutions, charities, churches, different organizations in the European Union, in Hungary. So the loss of state recognition meant the loss of all state funding, and there's an uphill battle to have its status restored. So this is an interesting question that I'm looking at studying besides the subject of women, of how what is religious freedom in the European Union if we can just have one church preferred over another? Do we really have the freedom of religion at the moment? I would like to go into the subject of women, that I've highlighted some issues about freedom of religion in general. So what is the European Union doing for women? Women in general, these are not religious women. So equality between women and men is a fundamental value of the European Union, and one that has been enshrined in the treaty from the very beginning, as the Rome Treaty included a provision on equal pay. The status of religiously observant women is hard to tackle because there is a clash between gender equality and religious freedom in many cases. Which human right is stronger? the next subject that I would like to talk about is to continue on European Commission, European Union. What are the priorities of the European Commission in terms of gender equality at the moment? So in December 2015, the Commission presented the strategic engagement for gender equality for 2016-2019. It represents the work program for gender equality policy during this Commission's mandate. So the strategic engagement outlined 5 priority areas. 1, increasing female labor market participation and the equal economic independence of women and men. 2, reducing the gender pay, earnings, and pension gaps, and thus fighting poverty among women. 3, promoting equality between women and men in decision-making. 4, combating gender-based violence and protecting and supporting victims. And finally, promoting gender equality and women's rights across the world. So these are the current priorities of the European Commission. And I went further to look at how can these priorities or objectives be applied to women in migration at the moment. So how does the European Union protect women in migration? That's the next question. Well, there is an ongoing reform of the common European asylum system at the moment, and the European Commission has proposed to strengthen the provision for vulnerable asylum applicants. These are women, children, as we talked about in the previous discussions. The right of a child has been brought up in many of your presentations. So this involves more ambitious provisions for assessing vulnerability and an obligation for member states to take the specific needs of women applicants into account who have experienced gender-based harm. The strengthened provisions also aim to ensure that asylum applicants have access to medical care, legal support, appropriate trauma counseling, and psychosocial care. The proposal for the new asylum procedure regulation advocates gender-sensitive procedures for granting international protection. Women, for instance, should be given an effective opportunity to have a private interview separate from their spouse, so they can really tell their stories. They can really, if they're in trouble, if they're undergoing family violence, for example, domestic violence. Sorry, that's the word I meant to use. Where possible, they should be assisted by female interpreters and female medical practitioners, especially if they may have been a victim of gender-based violence. So, and in addition to this, there's the European Asylum Support Office. The office developed several tools in order to ensure an effective implementation of legal provisions for gender-related issues. So this is what we have from the European Commission at the moment, for being sensitive to women in migration. In addition, we have the Istanbul Convention, which the Council of Europe's Istanbul Convention offers human rights-based approach to fighting violence against women. In March 2016, the Commission made a proposal for the European Union to become a party to the Convention. This would strengthen its accountability for the promotion of fundamental rights within and beyond the European Union borders. The proposals made by the Commission are currently being discussed in the Council. The European Parliament will then need to consent to the EU succession. And then, of course, if we go a little bit away from European Union policy, we have the United Nations with UN Women, just an image, and UN Women, this constant campaigns to encourage sustainability for women, providing educational services around the world. And in addition, with the UN Security Council Resolution 1325, which There's a resolution on women, peace, and security with an objective to promote national action plans on these subjects. Just some statistics from some Eurostat data on how many, this is 2014 data that I could find about women in migration. So there are out of 1,242,155 people who applied for asylum in Europe, 339,955 were women. So there's 27% of the total refugee population in Europe are women. So it affects a significant part. And there are some other subjects within the European Union that I've been studying that could be violations of freedom of religion and gender equality. There is a subject called aguna, which is a Hebrew term. It's a Jewish term. It's about a woman who would like to get divorced, and her husband is not giving her consent for divorce. This way, according to Jewish law, only a husband is allowed to commentate a divorce procedure, which is very difficult, especially because Jews have a really strong connection to Israel. So in Israel, there's no such a thing as civil marriage. So for them to get remarried, it's impossible. The state of Israel makes it impossible. And also, under religious grounds, the woman has to wait for years to beg, to ask for her husband to start the divorce procedures. And unfortunately, of course, in the European Union, we have the civil procedure of getting divorced, but many of these women are living in such secluded religious communities when we look in Belgium, in Antwerp, Belgium has the largest size of Hasidic Jewish communities, that women are not allowed to walk on the same side of the street with men. They have to cross the street. They're not allowed to drive in their communities, and these are, if you live under these rules, you're probably under fear to access institutions like civil institutions. And it's a big issue. There was actually at New York University, they held this event called the Aguna Summit every year to deal with the issues of these women. Aguna actually means woman in chains, because it comes from the story of women and their husbands leaving to war, and just in case they didn't return, they had to sign a divorce letter for their wives so they could remarry if they didn't return after a certain amount of years. So, and for those certain amount of years, they couldn't marry, even though their husbands were gone. So this concept of woman under chains, it's a very current concept that affects thousands of women today in the European Union and in the United States, Canada, and in the Western world. Also, another, and this is behind religious freedom. So, and another issue is female genital mutilation. It's a subject we can't avoid when we talk about women. So the World Health Organization defines female genital mutilation as all procedures involving partial or total removal of the external female genitalia or other injury to the female genital organs, whether for cultural or other non-therapeutic reasons. Estimates show that there may be as many as 200 million victims of female genital mutilation worldwide, including at least 500,000 in the European Union. FGM is a crime in all EU member states. In many EU countries, it is also possible to prosecute for conducting FGMs abroad, following the principle of extraterritoriality. This prevents families from taking their daughters abroad to their countries of origin to perform this procedure. So at the 9th European, in addition, at the 9th European Forum on the Rights of a Child, 10 principles were highlighted, and for integrated child protection. So they aim to prevent and respond to violence against children, including gender-based violence, FGM, and other harmful practices. In addition, we have the International Day for Violence Against Women. And this is, again, an issue with female genital mutilation. It's not a religious thing, it's not freedom of religion, it's a cultural requirement, which is deemed as completely illegal in the European Union. It's actually an interesting subject. I'm looking at how, not with FGM, but with other things, like when we talk about European values and religious freedom, do we need to make these women arriving more European, or should we respect their religions? And are these actually violations? For them, this is normal, this is their culture, this is their religion. Is there a fine line between this? Okay, another topic that I just wanted to discuss was the special quota project in Germany about Yazidi Wives. There was a very nice effort in October 2014, 2 months after the Islamic State invaded the district of Sinjar in Iraq, and they massacred the Yazidi men and captured 7,000 Yazidi women and girls. And the German state of Baden-Württemberg took a decision. It would bring 1,000 Yazidi women and children who had escaped captivity to Germany on a special visa to receive free treatment. So the budget for this program was set at 95 million euros, which is a very nice initiative of Germany within the European Union for solving an issue of religiously observant women today. Okay? When we talk about women, we cannot ignore two issues that are going on. The no-go zones in France that you probably all remember, the Fox News scandal of the two women entering the cafes in France in the no-go zones, and there was a big scandal about it. And first it was believed to be a fake story, but then currently the Parisien writes that there are several hundred square meters of pavement abandoned to men alone. Women are no longer considered entitled to be there. Cafes, bars, and restaurants are prohibited to them, as are the sidewalks, the subway station, and public squares. So women are not allowed to enter cafes in the European Union. But a similar thing is going on from the Jewish tradition. If we just look at a New York example, it's not a European Union example, but there's a bus service called Muncie Trails, and women are only allowed to go to the back of the bus. This bus goes between New York City and Muncie, leaves from Times Square. Men are in the front, women are in the back. An incident took place. There was a lawsuit in Israeli public buses, the Szeged bus company, that's the public bus company of Israel. Similar story happened. The woman was asked to go to the back of the bus. She didn't want to. She sued. These are everyday events going on in the Western world, basically. And is there a difference? Is this these communities all rely on the commandment of female virtues and modesty. It's commanded by religion to be modest, to be separated. It's not good for the same sexes to mingle. So they have a justification. But can we allow this in the Western? Should we be culturally sensitive to them, or should we educate? Which it's very hard to decide which direction to take with the freedom of religion and gender equality, when modesty is truly a commandment and a virtue in religion. So there is a reason why they are being separated in these public places, even though they are in the Western world. Okay, next. Okay, another issue, voting rights. I I couldn't ignore it for this chapter of my research. In Saudi Arabia, actually, the country known for Sharia law, I put a diagram. It's a really funny one. They introduced voting in Saudi Arabia in 2011. So they have suffrage under Sharia law, which is a great development. 130,000 women were registered to vote, compared to, which is a small number. It's like a 10% of the 1.36 million men, but still it's a development. Female candidates won 20 seats out of more than 2,000 municipal seats. It's small, but it's a big development considering Sharia law. But it's very funny, I know to say, that within the diagram it says in Saudi Arabia we have now won the right to vote, but we still can't drive to the polling booth. And they're not alone. Women are not allowed to drive in communities in Antwerp or in Montreal, Canada, where they have a big Jewish community, for example. So it's not an uncommon thing, but it sounds, compared to voting and driving, and where is the freedom of religion and gender equality here? There's a trade-off again. However, in other countries, I just wanted to put up some years when voting and suffrage began in other countries. The United States was 1920. Interestingly, Turkey was back in 1934. Oh, thank you so much. Wow. And Libya, which is very involved now with the migrant crisis, they already had voting rights for women in 1965. So even though these women have rights, they are suffering in other forms. Okay. I'll just sum up soon. So I wanted to talk in the previous part about abortion and education. How when I was looking at the religious school systems of that are validated in the European Union, women are getting an education, religious women are getting an education, although secular studies for the future, so for them the opportunity to join a program like Erasmus after graduation is difficult because it's actually discouraged. Even though they get these religious girls are getting an education in certain sects, it's not the preferred choice. University is still not the preferred choice in the most religious communities. It's more of getting married or becoming an educator within the religious community, not to go out to the outside world. And there is, at least from the Jewish curriculum, the religious Orthodox Jewish curriculum, there is a limit. They try to put as little of the secular studies as possible into the curriculum, and most of the religious to protect. So the goal is to protect the girls from the outside influence, from being polluted. As Sofia Karadi said, they were afraid of you being polluted. They are afraid of being polluted in reality. So I had to make the connection. And yes, so we have to, the European Union needs to find ways to teach at least the newcomers who are coming to Europe, to the European Union, about their opportunities, because they're coming to the Western world with European values. And we have all kinds of international conventions protecting women's rights, such as the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination for Women by the UN, and as I talked about all the about all the international regimes protecting the freedom of religion and gender equality. But there are challenges. It's definitely a challenge for the European Union to integrate people of all faiths and religions into European society with respect to Western values, religious values, and universal human rights standards. It's like you have to meet It's not a double standard, it's like a triple standard that you have to meet, plus gender equality coming in. It's a very difficult task. Because my biggest concern is what if religious law or the freedom of religion contradicts another human right? And this is what through my research, I've seen it does several times. And I hope to see developments in the European Union and many migrant women, religiously observant women becoming successful and reaching great lengths, such as the dream of Sofia Corradi and the founding mothers of Europe are enjoying Europe for its great values and opportunities. Okay, I'm done. I'm done. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Gina. That's a difficult subject you are dealing with. And sometimes, while listening to your paper, I thought to myself, well, there may be problems which cannot be solved. I don't know. I don't know, because, I mean, there are basic principles. Yeah. I mean, just clashing, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, you can solve it by law, but if law is not accepted, well, I don't know. That's really difficult. Okay, but you are entitled to ask questions right now, or make comments. Maite.
I don't want to do like it's not a religious comment, but I want to compare it with some experience that we have in the Andean countries that it made me remember, because I work on that field for not so long, but I work on that field, because we have two types of law: national law, and we have indigenous law, and they clash as well. So we had the same question what to do, because we have to respect indigenous law in different communities, but we have also to respect the national law and human rights. So, well, it's not easy to find an answer. So the way to do it was to find spaces to put together representatives of the national states, and at the same time, indigenous leaders talking about this subject. Because, for example, in some communities, physical punishment is allowed. So the agreement that that it was reached, although I don't know if it's always followed, but at least it was reached, it was human rights. You can do you can have your tradition, but respecting human rights. And it's a continuous struggle, but at the same time, it has to come from the bottom up, I think, in this case, because the people have to decide how to live, you know? And so when you were speaking, I was remembering this, because I don't think there is a correct answer.
Right. It's very interesting. Thank you for your comment. It's very interesting what you're saying. Actually, from a religious answer to it would be that you always have to respect the rule of law of the state that you live in. That's the answer. Like in the Jewish faith, at least, they always say you have to respect the rule of law. You should never go against the rule of the state. But if the rules of the religion are different than the state's rules, then I guess this is the solution, what you're saying, with agreements, with respecting human rights. I don't know about how the leaders of communities could agree on such peaceful ways, but actually the religious answer is you have to respect the rule of law first. Although we don't see that so often, because yeah. Thank you for the comment.
Luigi.
Thank you very much, Gina, for your presentation. I think this is a very interesting topic because I believe we are facing this struggle and our value system is challenged by this not contradiction but challenge between freedom of religion and respect for human rights. And mine is more a commentary, and actually I want to suggest you one thing that I read yesterday that occurred in Ontario in Canada, ruled that cultural differences do not justify violence against women, and can be an interesting case for your study. In general, I believe that we should find a core of values that needs to be shared beyond every cultural and religious belief. And this is definitely a very, very hard task.
Thank you for the comment. It's very interesting what you're saying. I'm definitely going to look at the ruling that you mentioned from Ontario. Yes, there needs to be. I couldn't agree with you more. There needs to be an agreement. As I said, the rule of law should be the priority over religious laws that would okay things like domestic violence, for example. Like you said, this one was about domestic violence, because it is acceptable by different religions to beat someone's wife. It's completely okay to educate children. This is completely okay, which goes against the rule of law. So we cannot. It's very interesting to see how culturally sensitive does the European Union have to be, or the lawmakers. Because we do have to be culturally sensitive. It's nice if they're coming from a different culture. We cannot impose. Do we have to change them? Like, that's a question that I constantly ask in my head. Are we supposed to reform the Muslim immigrants who are coming in? Are we supposed to change them, make them European? How are they supposed to dress? Like, do we expect them to wear jeans and shirts? Is that with the regulations that we have now? We have with the ruling in Luxembourg saying they're not allowed to wear religious symbols to work, the ruling that I quoted. So how do we expect these women to dress, for example, or men in general? Should they abandon all their religious observances? Or if we say, if we agree on that okay, they're not allowed to dress in religious attire, then we are reforming them. But if we agree with, but we cannot ignore the fact that there is a threat. There is Islam. Like, I don't want to say there is Islamophobia, but there is a threat. There is a security threat going on now. So there are reasons for everything, and it's very hard to answer where is the fine line. Where do you have to cut off? How much say does a state have in the autonomy of the individual as a religiously observant person? So it's very hard to find the line. But yeah, go ahead. I'll say it after.
If I may just add another consideration while you are speaking, is that what is the criteria of application of law? Because if we apply law according, I don't know, to your adhesion to a particular group, then I'm sitting here, I have certain rights. Maria Pia, sitting close to me from another social or religious group, has different rights. And this makes no sense because it's discriminating then.
Yes, and they're supposed to be, thank you for the comment. It's very interesting because we say, there is a saying that human rights are universal. It's supposed to be for everyone, but religion is particular. So it is particular. It goes for the individual. One is from this religion, another one is from that. And even within the religion, people have 5 different branches, and they don't even like each other, and they disagree on every single law that the religion had. So it's very hard to you cannot have separate laws for individuals. But when we have the freedom of religion, we need to respect. We need to respect religious practice, such as holidays, dietary needs, even religious attire. There's, I understand the concept of the ruling of Luxembourg, how it depended on the company's image, and the 2004 ruling of France about the dressing in public institutions, although it's a cold approach towards religion. But there needs to be a respect, but to a limit. So they need to develop the infrastructure. And I think the most important is to not to impose, not to change the religious, not to make them secular, because we have European values, we have so many things available for them. We have the right to education, freedom of speech, freedom of thought. We have a lot of the core values of the West, of Europe. We're not supposed to, I don't think the goal is to change them, to reform them, to make them completely different. I think the goal is to accept them. It's also a question: do we need integration or acceptance? Do we need to change them? Do we change them or assimilate them? That's another subject that we can discuss. But I think that the entire message that should come through is that for these women, especially that are arriving too, or not just the ones that are arriving, that are currently here and are suffering, that they should know that they have rights here that they can turn to. If it's a last resort, it's a last resort, but they have rights. They should never be scared to turn to the police. They should never be scared to get an education if that's what they really want. Because there is free will in this part of the world. They can do what they want. But if they want to live the way and if they accept this upon them, then I think it's out of cultural sensitivity and freedom of religion, we should let them be as they are. It's their choice. This is the freedom of religion. But if there's a violation and someone reports it, they should know that the European Union's institutions are 100% there to support them. And I think we should educate them. And I really think that the European Union needs to, besides this asylum center, how it's becoming more sensitive to gender issues, they should really build a training program or a welcoming center, just educating women about their rights here in Europe and what they have available here.
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah, thank you, Gina. I have, one question and one remark, maybe. Maybe I can start with a remark. So in the first couple of slides, you give like a really detailed overview where you actually code what means religious freedom, and you give certain topics that you wish to examine, I think, during your thesis. So my remark is that it's a really ambitious what you're trying to do, because you have a lot of variables.
Yes, that I'm studying.
Yeah, that you're studying,
And
and also from the table that you presented, you're giving like a classification of five different typologies
Models,
that you
yes.
want to study models, as you say, and which are also, I think, a methodological issue that I have with your thesis, because you have different kind of variables and then you have a different kind of cases, but you use the same measure. You should use this, I think, the same measure to apply through the same cases. Otherwise, you will get, I think, different kind of results, because the cases that you said, for example, religious attire in Luxembourg, you mentioned that.
Yeah.
So, for example, if you look at the Belgian case, that's not an issue, religious attire, because all different kind of religious people in Belgium don't have any problem with the religious attire. But if you look at maybe something quite specific, so I think that maybe you should,
Specify.
Selection of cases, maybe this is something that, you can work on. This is my opinion. And the second thing is what you and Luigi were saying about religious freedoms in Europe. Well, maybe we should look at it a bit, broader, this situation, and think about sexual freedoms in Europe. I know these are two different topics, but it goes through the narration of empowerment of minorities And there are series also documents, and these religious or sexual freedoms were also part of the EU politics, externalization of EU politics by, for example, including them in the soft acquis for the candidate countries. So, for example, there's a lot of research done now in gender studies on this connection between Europeanization and sexual liberties, integration of those into what is called EU acquis communautaire. But also, you know, in regard to the religious liberties, maybe it can be a good case study for you to look at, you know, how this differential outcome is monitored by the European Union, and what kind of powers the EU has in monitoring and assessing these throughout Europe and outside Europe. Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Thank you for your comments. I will take into consideration the first remark about the methodology, about studying the same variables, because you are right, because sometimes I do 2 states for one of the models, like I do France and Belgium, I mix them. I put them under the cold state, and although they do have different approaches on certain things, so on certain cases of the study. And the second one, the sexual freedom, could you elaborate on which type? Because I was considering this, actually, for this research. I just didn't want it to go into too much detail, such as even same-sex marriages would be something of interesting. Is that what you were considering, or what areas of sexual freedom do you think would...
For example, same-sex marriages,
for
example, or maybe just looking, you know, how the society reacts to the gay pride, for example.
Yes.
There's a lot of research
yes.
on this topic, and you know how the EU, for example, sees when there is some kind of a problem or violation of rights of these people in the streets or in courts, when they are beaten or put in jail, like in Ukraine or Russia or elsewhere in the world, you know, how the EU reacts to that, or how this is, you know, reflected in laws, in policies, in rulings made on local or regional, national levels. So I'm not an expert, but I think it's also a way of, you know, studying
also the Human Rights Campaign, you know, this organization, Human Rights Campaign.
I can put a few authors who are working on this.
It's a Washington-based organization. Yeah. They're one of the organizers of Pride, actually, in America. So that's a really good source for this to study from religious and state perspective. Thank you very much. Anyone else? Yes?
Than a question or a comment is also a suggestion. I don't know if you have read a book written by a Portuguese sociologist. I quoted him yesterday, Boaventura de Sousa. He has a book, a small but really interesting book. I'm not sure about the English title because I read it in Portuguese, but it should be something like "If God Were an Activist of Human Rights." And in it compares different systems of human rights with different religions. So it's very interesting.
What is the name of the author? Could you repeat it again?
Boaventura. I give it to you later, don't worry.
Okay.
And apart from him, it may be interesting for you as well, the political theory, the theology, from coming from Germany mainly, from Metz, and really near to his thoughts. You have the theory of liberation, not the first, probably not the first period, neither the second one, but nowadays, from the theory of liberation, there are some feminists that includes also this question of sexuality, religion, and human rights. Of course, not in the EU, but maybe you can go through them and take some ideas. For example, there is a feminist called Ivone Guevara that is really good, with really good articles written about that.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll look into those sources of literature, for sure, sources for my work.
Bettina.
Thank you very much. Well, I wanted to ask you whether you compare the US model with the European model, and which of those you think maintains the balance between religious freedom and women's rights best. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. Yes, in my research, indeed, when I'm studying the 5 state models, so I broke them down to the pure model, which was the United States. And I didn't do a complete assessment of the European Union, United States within the European Union, since each state has different policies as towards religious freedom. And that's how I was planning on comparing the policies towards women as well between the US and the states of the European Union. But if I would have to, which one suits best, in terms of religiously observant women, which is my subject, I would say the pure model, the United States, because there is no separation. There is a separation between church and state. So there is no preferred church status. That means that every religiously observant person has the same rights. For example, in the European Union, in the none of the states are like this. They're all like either coordinated or enemy. That they have preferred church status, so it's harder. It's harder to get the same support for state funding, even for the religious women. And also, the women's rights movements in the United States are very strong. That's why I've seen developments such as this Aguna Summit, the one I told you that I talked about at New York University, international, the Women's March that took place. There's a lot of activism for women in the United Nations, located in the United States, even though it's a global thing. It's just you feel the influence of the global, which the European Union adapts constantly. The same ideology is being adapted. But but European values are in complete respect of women's rights. So I'm very happy to be a woman here. So I think it's great. Just from a religious perspective, I'm trying to find the best state model for a religious woman, which I haven't found yet. So I hope to. So far is the pure model, but with the pure model, you lose the benefit of funding. So that's also a problem. If you're religious, you're a woman, you have no funding, and then these women, religiously observant women coming from these, if you look at like poor societies and their poverty, their only choice of income is getting married, because education is not, they're not allowed to work. Most religious women are expected to raise children at home, and work is something that you mingle with men and you become not modest. Even in the Jewish faith, it's not just in Islam. For example, I was in a village in Canada, which is 40 miles away from Montreal, from the capital. It's a village, 3,000 people, Jewish people are living there. They have their own schools, institutions, everything. Women and not married men are not allowed to drive cars. They're not allowed to have jobs. Only married men are allowed to have jobs. And the education is they're not allowed to bring in secular newspapers, televisions, anything, no access to outside information. And these are Canadian women I'm talking about, Western women. And the same thing is going on in Europe, in the European Union, in Belgium, in England. They have the same communities. In France, in Strasbourg actually has a Hasidic community like this in France. And similar laws are going on. But I feel as long as this is something of choice for a woman, they're happy with this, then it's okay. It's not a violation on human rights. But if they start feeling that it's wrong, that they're suffering under it, that it's not their choice anymore. When I think the freedom of choice is a big thing. That's when I think that's the line where you have to step in.
Yeah, but when you want to choose, you have to know the other side.
Yes, and you don't know it. That's dangerous. And I think it's a very good thing. And I think that's the role of the European Union, to teach these women, and not to change them, not to want them to wear jeans and T-shirts and to be just Westerners right away to strip them of their culture, but to show them that there is an opportunity, to give them incentive, that you can apply for Erasmus, you can go to university, you can, if you want, there is this. If you don't want, you're happy there, there is that. But it's very hard to build a bridge for them to step outside, because I think there is fear as well with male dominance and everything, that males are the ones supporting them, since marriage is the ultimate goal for many of the religious. So it's very hard to build a bridge from going from marriage and children and no career, while the woman that I hosted now for the UN Women Committee, Christina Morvai, a European member of parliament, she had 3 children. She is a head of the criminal law department in Hungary for a university. And she could do this career with having 3 children and going to Brussels and these women need to see that there are examples, or like Sofia Corradi is an example. Like, we need to see and show them examples. We shouldn't change them, we should show them the opportunity. And then yes, that's it. Okay. Thank you so much for your question.
There's just one thing related to what you just said. You seem to oppose Western values with religion in those cases, no. And I'm not sure.
I don't intend to.
Okay.
I don't intend to oppose them, but there are cases. When we talk about Western values, I take the international regimes, such as we look at the EU Charter on Fundamental Rights, and we look at, so you have a set of rights written down there, right? Freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom of conscience. And when we look at, or we look at the UN, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we have a set of rights. These are the Western values. But when we look at the laws of religion, it's not that they're not always in agreement with them. When you look at a divorce procedure, for example, according to the national laws in Europe, any female or male can start it. According to religious law of the Jewish faith and also of Islam, only males can start it. So there are clashes. I don't oppose the Western. I'm not opposing it. I'm trying to find a solution which works for both, which respects religious freedom and embraces European values and democracy and all the goods that Europe has to offer and what the West has to offer. Yes.
Maite, now the microphone.
Okay, something I am really curious, because I was thinking you gave Jewish examples, Muslim examples, but I'm wondering Catholic examples or evangelical examples. Because I come from a region which the main groups against same-sex marriage and against abortion are the most Catholics.
Yeah.
So, and the arguments that they use to don't accept equal rights, for example, for homosexuals is religious ones. Mm-hmm. So I wonder if that exists in Europe or in the EU, or if maybe the cases are not, it's not easy to find a case, or they don't exist, or maybe I wonder what happens.
Thank you for the question. It's a very good question. Actually, a recent case of it's a case that took place in Hungary with the government using European Union funds to fund a hospital that doesn't carry out abortion, and this was a hospital under the church. So it's okay. So is the government supporting? Is the government pro-life? Is the government openly against abortion? Is this the question? Is that why aren't other hospitals being supported who are carrying out abortions? So it's an issue. It's an issue. It's actually a very strong lobby. And same with this same-sex marriages, how they oppose it, and it becomes part of law. So definitely, it's very important to study the Catholic examples because they're very, very strong on on issues like abortion, same-sex marriage. It's a very interesting one on abortion. It's a Muslim example from the Serbian-Bosnian war, when the woman, they think Islam doesn't allow abortions at all. And Bosnian women were raped during the Serbian war, during the war by the Serbian army, and it's called fatah, I think, in Islam, the ruling, like a decree. They passed a decree that the women were allowed to abort the children that were caused by the rape. So, so the other two, from the Judeo-Christian traditions, Judaism and Islam actually allows abortion in some, not all branches of Islam allows it, but some in some emergency cases when it deals with the life of a mother, when it could cost the life of a mother, or when it's rape. Rape is it's also in the Jewish Bible. So it's very interesting to see how the Catholic Church views abortion in all cases to be it's something that it's not, because the fetus is considered life. It's a very different interpretation, and how this hospital was, I don't remember the amount of funds they got, and the only reason they got the funds is because they were pro-life and against abortion. And the other hospitals, you should look at the conditions. They are in terrible conditions. The hospitals in Hungary, no funding, and it's a preferred church. I was talking about that debate, preferred church status. That's why I'm currently arguing that the pure state model is probably the most beneficial, even though there is no funding for churches, because in the United States they operate like an LTD, if you think about it, if you think from a legal. They're on their own. They're like a company, like an organization. It's not a church. It's a different. So they collect their funds from their congregants, basically, and donors, like a foundation. So,
okay. I don't see any further questions. That's good for the break. It will be longer a little bit to have lunch. Gina, thank you very much for your very thoughtful paper. Yeah, much success in your work.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the points and guiding me through. Thank you so much.